Hello and welcome to Insight, everyone. I'm Nnamdi Odikpo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Thank you for joining us.
It's actually good to have you join us this week. We will, on this episode, delve into two critical issues affecting the nation. First is the persistent cash scarcity despite CBN's directives. And secondly, we'll talk about the forthcoming National Youth Confab aimed at empowering young Nigerians in the country's decision-making process. I'm sure you've already noticed Elizabeth Omori is here. She's back. Welcome back, Lizzie.
Thank you so much, Nnamdi. Thank you so much. Well, we'll also be taking a look at human rights issues, which are essential for promoting justice and equity. And for us to have healthier communities, we need to protect these rights. So protecting these rights, also our focus on this edition.
Very well then, let's kickstart the program.
Whatever the issues are,
the National Assembly is constitutionally empowered to scrutinize.
However complex or intricate.
We have involved all the academia, the members of the academia. We have involved the academies.
Be it government policies or in fact any issue of public concern.
Our job is to help you gain clarity and make sense of it all.
This is not really healthy for our democracy.
There's a lot of agreements in terms of who has been in power longest and who becomes the governor of the state.
It's also in the quality of food being consumed.
After all, perception is insight.
And gaining understanding is also getting insight.
So let's begin. Despite directives from the Central Bank of Nigeria to commercial banks to make cash readily available to customers, the cash scarcity conundrum persists, leaving a wary public frustrated and burdened with spending concerns. The Apex Bank, yes, has indeed threatened severe consequences for defaulting banks and has also invited public complaints, but a good number of questions remain. What's behind the lingering cash crunch, and how can the regulator restore liquidity and public trust? Let me bring in my guest at this point, and together we will examine the implications of this crisis and the way forward. My guest is Dr. Sam Amadi. He is a policy strategist, law and governance expert, as well as the director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. Dr. Amadi also is an associate professor of law, and I'd like to welcome you to Insight. Dr. Amadi, thank you so much for joining me on the program.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
Yes. Dr. Mahdi, I recall this directive by the CBN was issued sometime around November 29, if I'm not mistaken. But between then and now, what we still see are multiple accounts of Nigerians still experiencing difficulties accessing cash. There's a common scenario that's been playing out across all of the states, most of the states, and this is a situation where banks now limit withdrawals to between 5,000 and 20,000 naira over the counter. And then the ATM machines, even those machines in front of the banks, dispense as little as 5,000 naira to non-customers and just maybe 10,000 naira to customers, their own customers. Dr. Mahdi, what are the key drivers of this persistent cash scarcity? Are we dealing with Nigerians perhaps hoarding cash, or a group of saboteurs within the financial system artificially creating the conditions for what we're currently experiencing? What could possibly be wrong, even within the Nigeria banking system, whether it is structural or an underlying structural, defect or, issue contributing to this cash scarcity?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is structural. The banks are undergoing significant system reviews and upgrades. So we saw Zenith Bank, we saw Access Bank, GTB, each of the banks. And that is because of vulnerabilities. Some have observed that some of the fintech banks, quote unquote, are not suffering a lot of these constructs because maybe they have smarter systems that are more portable and upgradable with less disruption. So the bigger banks are going through system review, and that occasions significant shutdowns. We saw that with a couple of banks when it was difficult to even make transactions in some days. That's one aspect of what's going on here. The second thing going on here is also that this is seasonal in the sense that we see uptick in cash requirements, cash demands. People want to prepare for the Eurotide at the end of season. And so you see some maybe more than necessary or more than usual desire for cash. And then farming products, agricultural products, rural areas, and all that. I see also some reluctance to sign on to the cashless policy in some places, failure of transaction, POS, and all that. And so some vendors are demanding cash payments, unlike the early days where there was so much trust on the cashless policy and seamless transactions from phone, POS to other platforms. So significant failures have created a cultural pushback. And so you would see people are buying from maybe farming agricultural products from rural communities would need to go with cash. So that's also a part of it. And again, yes, the CBN has issued instruction, but again, the problem is that implementation, enforcement. And so the banks are still not fully implementing because they need to make their system ready all the time. So I think it's a system failure. I don't think it's sabotage. I think it's more of the failure of the banks. Many of them are victims of cyber attack, and their system is not sophisticated. Maybe before now, they have not been paying attention to upgrades and proofing their system from cyber. There's fintech, small they are more agile, agility, adaptability, and preemption. So you see less attacks with fintech. You see so many customers complain about transactions that they didn't authorize, and that has been into disputes, and that has a significant portion of losses for customers and affect customer confidence. So the banks themselves are now fighting back to upgrade their system, but that upgrade is sluggish, and kind of the inefficiency of banking operation is showing up in terms of sometimes they can't allow transactions. They are wasting time. They're spending days upgrading, and so we see this accumulation of inefficiency. We see increased demand for cash arising from loss of confidence in the cashless policy because of multiple failures. And we are seeing also that the CBN, perhaps beyond issuing directives, maybe have to also put feet on the ground in terms of driving through enforcement, surveillance, and taking seriously some of those reports from customers.
Dr. Madi, when you reference the diminishing diminishing confidence in government's cashless policy, is there somewhat of a linkage to the Naira redesign policy of the last administration and perhaps a seeming lack of trust, or would I say lack of confidence by the public in embracing, whatever policy the CBN and the banks are throwing into the mix? Because we saw what played out during the Naira redesign policy by the last administration, championed at the time by the then CBN governor, Emefiele. And now we're seeing, are we perhaps seeing an aftershock of that at this point, with people now, Nigerians, deliberately not trusting the system, or rather being skeptical about the system and deciding to perhaps hold cash? Is that part?
Well, I think in a sense, yes. Partly, the failures and the crisis of the past will not go away easily. It will impact on confidence in the banking system. Daily reports about the corruption or alleged corruption and failures of that past. It has impact on the present. So we're going to continue to see that, loss of confidence, but can be rebuilt. And again, but at the micro level of customers' confidence or transactions, the point is that as long as people continue to have significant examples or instances where transfers fail and there are disputes, who suffer some level of discomfort, they're going to, they consider and try to have more cash transactions. So the relationship between a culture of cash transaction and a culture of cashlessness all depends on functionality. the fact that if people have diminishing instances of failure to become negligible, then they begin to become less risk averse. And then they also again do the cash design. Because of cash, because there are no cash, market women were forced to insist on transfers. At that level, who reduce transactions, and those who could do nothing have to accept service. And that's the rise of these fintech, especially OP and others, where there are no infrastructure for signing up, just had OP the transaction. But now, where there's no such coercion, no such personal agency, people will already choice. It's okay, you have to pay me cash because cash is available. So what we're going to see now is these figures will force the need for cash. And again, this is Christmas, just like also the dollar effect. We're going to see a bound in the exchange rate because more Nigerians are coming in with dollar, buying in naira. So you're going to see demand on naira, which should be good for us at the level of forex, but might constitute some problem at the level of cash availability. Again, the central bank, through the open market operation, tries to regulate the cash availability. And the last time we had about 4.something trillion cash circulating, about 3 or so of the former sector. So the CBN also, even though they say give cash, they're also regulating cash availability. And then the banks themselves now regulate at the second level to customers in terms of how much they get. But again, I think that the demand supply is higher. People probably asking for more cash. The system is not well aligned. Those contribute to short-term crunch we are experiencing now.
Doc, talking about regulation, and then you brought in the CBN. Interestingly, earlier you also referenced the so-called, do I describe them as semi-formal buffers now? I mean, the POS operators, interestingly, Doc, they have also significantly increased their own charges by almost 100 naira cross withdrawal amount. So these days when you go for 5,000, you're either paying maybe 200 naira as against 100 that it used to be just a couple of weeks back. So now, and again, Doc, we're also getting reports of some banks favoring high-end customers by giving them bulk cash at the expense of ordinary Nigerians. When you say regulations and you talk about CBN and enforcement, I wonder how effective some of the measures that they have introduced, they have put forward in holding defaulting banks accountable, how that can, CBN as the regulator and enforcer can ensure compliance.
Well, I think from experience, the CBN has done a very effective historically or retail level regulation. By that I mean, the CBN says you shouldn't do this to customers. This is how you should operate. And then banks are dealing in contrary manner to their customers at the retail level. The central banks, its supervisory infrastructure is laborious and of course top heavy. And expectedly, they deal with macro issues and regulate, identify, and once in a while penalize banks and use that penalty to incentivize behavior at the retail level. Now, what happens is that the complaint has to be generated in a manner that fits into a kind of a risk, visible risk, and then the central bank will be forced to take action. But at the level of micro complaints, poor farmers, low net worth consumers, customers to the banks who are suffering deprivation, those may not correlate to a significant risk that triggers first get the attention of the central bank and then triggers sustained real action. So we are going to see regulatory failure, enforcement failures, because some of these complaints are not legible in the financial sense to the central bankers. They are not seeing this risk, these failures as contagious, as risky to the big stake. So banks will get away with it. And then banks too have been very unprofessional sometimes in the way they discharge services. So they privilege some particular customers who may need massive cash usage. We saw that with the cash crunch when politicians had, important politicians getting more than disproportionate control over cash. And they drained the available cash, and the people who need 100,000, 50,000, 20,000, probably all get 5,000 because somebody that was in the election time. So you expect that.